Hello and welcome to the Game Birds. My name is Bree.
And I'm Alice.
And today we are playing our very first co-op game called Bokura. This game is my choice, but I am not the one who found this game originally. Alice, how did you find this game?
Oh, did I find this game?
You did. I had never heard of it. Do you remember?
I don't. The first time we played this together, we didn't finish it. We didn't get like super far, but we played it together, was it a couple years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
And so I don't recall how I found this game. It probably was either just on my Steam homepage or I saw a TikTok about it, possibly. So yeah, sorry, just a little bit of a random indie game that happens to be multiplayer.
Yeah, and actually it must have been about a year ago because this game did come out in August of 2023. So we had played it, I want to say for about an hour or two, and then we got stuck. I realized we had not played a single co-op game for Game Bird, so I'm like, okay, now's the time. I was interested in picking this game up again because it is very, very interesting. For the premise of this, basically you start on a train, you are a boring adult, and you are just reminiscing about the past. Specifically, you are reminiscing about when, quote unquote, it happened. It goes back to you being 10 years old with your best friend, playing Pokemon, and getting up to some mischief.
It's 2D pixel art. You know, it's pretty chill, cute, normal pixel art vibes. Like, I wouldn't say this game has like super bright saturated colors like some of the games we've played. It is a little bit muted down even from the beginning, but it's just, you know, it's a chill game, and you start reminiscing about your past with your best friend. It's kind of got a nice cute start to it when you're playing Pokemon.
Yes, and it's funny you mentioned about the color palette because that changes very soon. So when you are with your best friend playing this Pokemon thing, you decide that you want to cause a little mischief and blow up a statue that is at the top of a hill, but you have to go through a forest to get there. As you are traveling through the forest together, you discover a rotting deer carcass, it looks like, and eventually you start to feel a little dizzy, you and your friend, and when you wake up, you come back to a completely different world. And what's super interesting about that in particular is that the worlds are different for each player.
Yeah, so my world, when I came to, it was a very kind of, honestly, it didn't look too much different, but it was like a cute forest situation going on.
And for my view, it was a robot dystopia. It was all very muted colors, very dark, lots of broken machinery in the background, and we were just two little cute robots.
Yeah, I guess that is the thing. Even though I still woke up in a forest, suddenly we had turned into animals. It was a little bit confusing.
I think, honestly, the first time we played this, I don't think we even recognized or realized that our views were different until we started talking about it a little bit more. And really, the name of this game is communication. Because your views are different, you have to talk to each other in order to progress in the game. There will be parts where it looks like my character doesn't have any solid ground to walk on, but Alice's character does. So she has to direct me or move some things around to make me able to traverse a place that I can't really see. If you're going to play this game, make sure you are playing with somebody that you can communicate with very, very well.
Yeah, so this is another platformer similar to Chicken Journey, but Chicken Journey was really focused on a lot of different jumping puzzles and a lot of aligning where you are and trying to figure out where to go. I would say this one is definitely much more focused on the puzzles themselves because it has that unique feature where she sees one thing, I see another thing. Sometimes we see similar stuff, like we both see a button to turn on, but there'll be times where she has something on her screen that's completely not what I see at all. And so that really sets it up to have a lot of different interesting puzzles to solve.
Yes, and I will say that the puzzles are definitely very challenging. I do like the way that this game kind of sets up each challenge. It usually kind of gives you a version of the puzzles you're about to see, and it'll be just a small thing that you have to do. And once you kind of understand the mechanic, it'll up the ante each time. So you'll have a couple more things to move. You'll have a little more complicated puzzle to solve together. One of the last levels, my character takes their head completely off, and wherever my head would end up, that was where my vision remained. So I was almost completely blind for those sections. I would say actually entirely blind because my body was moving separately from my head. Alice had to completely verbally walk me through what I was going through because I could not see.
I mean, conversely, there was a point when we were trying to get your head back where the head was traveling was the information we needed to get it back. And so you had to describe to me what your head was seeing in order for me to then direct our bodies to the right place.
I'm curious, Alice, how you felt about like the general like level of challenge in this game. Do you think this is something that anybody could pick up?
It wasn't always easy. We got stuck a couple times, but even on the 3 to 4 puzzles that we got stuck near the end, when I looked up the answers, we were like one step away. We were just like, I would say if we weren't playing this for a pod, we were trying to get this done by today to like record it. We were a little bit on like, you know, we just wanted to get it through it, right? Really in those moments, if we would have turned it off and come back, I think after a day, we probably would have solved them because again, Every single time we got stuck, it's like we had the answer. We just were missing one little thing at the end of each one. So are the puzzles really easy? They're not super easy, but they're also not like unattainable. They do require communication. They do require a little bit of trial of error. Whether or not it's for everyone, I would say like if you are really don't want to use your brain at all and turn your brain off kind of game, it's not that. You do have to communicate and talk and think a little bit. But I wouldn't say it's like you'll never be able to get through it sort of situation.
No, I think that's fair to say because, yeah, we did have to look up quite a few things. And I appreciate the context there of like, because we wanted to review this in a certain amount of time, it was really important for us to like hammer this out a little bit. I would say I think we played 3 sessions total, about like 2 hours each for about 6 to 7 hours of gameplay.
Did you find it too hard? Like, was that too frustrating for you, you think?
Only in the context of that we had a bit more of a time crunch. Especially the last time we played together, I was getting a little bit fatigued because there was this one puzzle where things were so exact that we had to repeat that puzzle like it felt like 10, 15 times. We were slightly to the right, slightly to the left, like slightly off. We knew the solution to the puzzle. We just kept making small errors and we had to repeat. And again, I think probably ideally for this game, one, again, play this with somebody that you can absolutely communicate with very well. And two, maybe this is a better game to have like shorter sessions with, especially if you hit a wall with something kind of similar to what we did, but just a little more spaced out, maybe like a 1 hour session with your friend. That might give you a little more space to breathe. Because when you're just sitting there looking at something for 2 hours straight, it can be a little frustrating, but I never thought it was, to your point, inaccessible. I feel like the solutions that we couldn't figure out, we were so close to finding out. Or I know for one level, we didn't even realize that these two things could stack on top of each other. It was just a mechanic that we didn't realize was available in the game. So definitely challenging, but not overly so.
And it's not like they're trying to throw you off ever. It's not like they add a bunch of extra things around the level and around the area you can see that are useless. So for the most part, you can sort of, what's the word? Process by elimination. In that one case you just said, like, we didn't realize one thing stacked upon another, but I feel like we would have gotten there. You know, this is all we have. Like they have, if we didn't think they stacked one direction, let's try the other direction.
Yeah, actually, I love that explanation because I feel like a lot of the times that was, again, where the communication really came in. We would kind of talk to each other back and forth and be like, okay, here's what we have. We have this tool. We need to get here. I need to be here. How do we get there? And we were able to kind of have a couple hypotheses, try to figure things out. Sometimes we would test something and completely not work. There's a lot of saving in the game. So I never felt like, you know, we were just stuck in a place and we had to repeat so much over and over again, which is very, very nice, especially in a puzzle platformer. You're going to make mistakes. So it is very nice that it didn't feel so punishing, but still very challenging.
One thing we haven't touched on yet is that this is also kind of a psychological horror game in a way. It's not in your face psychological horror by any means, but the story is kind of scary. Things that are going on in the forest are kind of weird. I mean, I know you saw the robot hell dystopia version of it as well. I'm seeing kind of a Happy Tree Friends, like murderous, cute animals version instead. But there are some really, really weird and unexplainable things going on in this forest. And I wouldn't say it is gory to a point of like, personally, I do not like watching gory movies or too violent of movies. It's pixel art, so there's not a whole lot of gore to be had. It's, you know, some red pixels, but there is blood. There is absolutely pixel blood.
I was mentioning this to you yesterday, Alice, that like when I was looking at the store page, if you go through like the general tags, it's cute, puzzle platformer, chill. Like there's a lot of like very soft words to describe it. And dead center of the tags is psychological horror. So I did not realize that when we went to go play this game. I knew there was kind of like a kind of mystical element to it, but I did not realize it was straight up horror. As you mentioned, it's not overt. It is not like a bloodbath or anything like that, but it does deal with some heavy topics. There are a couple sections in the game that are no mic sections. There are parts where Alice would see one scene from one perspective and I would see a completely different scene. And then when we came back together, we had to make a choice based on the information we had in each of those sections. And the reason I mentioned that in regards to the horror element is Alice mentioned a bloodbath that she witnessed. I didn't see that at all, but I was in a person's house hearing the story about why they came to be. A slight trigger warning for they do mention assaults, they do mention murder, things like that. So it is mostly mentioned versus like visually shown depending on the perspective you have. But it does deal with some kind of heavier topics like that. We did not expect that at all. We did not realize this was a psychological horror until we got to the psychological horror elements of it.
This must have been just such a random new release 2-player game that I thought looked cute. I had no idea we were going to be having different perspectives. I had no idea that this was psychological horror. Like, not for us to be spoiling it for everyone else, but like that, I mean, we did have that keen advantage of having that real element of surprise with this because I just had no idea. I must have just picked this randomly a year ago because I had no idea anything about this.
I don't know. It's funny because I was actually very jealous when I found out what your view was. I was like, oh, of course you get the cute animals that you get to look at the whole time. But I feel like in hindsight, your visuals tended to be a little more on the horror side than mine were because I was already in such a drab setting. When like more horrific things happened, it didn't look that bad. I gave the example earlier of my character taking his head off. A robot taking his head off is not that traumatic at all. Like that's kind of, it's just parts of a machine. Alice's view was very different for that. That was quite literally, I believe my character was a bear in her view, taking his head off and then just like a decapitated body walking around. Lots of blood in that section.
Your spine was sticking out of your neck. Yeah, my view was a bit gorier than yours. So there's pros and cons to having each view, certainly. We also had different music, I think you were saying.
Yes, actually. And I don't think we even realized that until our second playthrough. I had a very lovely piano medley the whole time. And I think you said, what was yours like?
I mean, it wasn't like scary, but it was just foresty chime. It's a little bit upbeat. It wasn't anything too weird. It probably, whatever music you're hearing when you weren't in the robot world is probably similar to that.
Trying to think of what else I want to talk about here. I'm like, I feel like I'm missing things.
So, I mean, this game is about our friendship and also us like learning about our families and our different living situations. Turns out that I was a little rich kid and you're a little poor kid, and there's just like dynamics there. There was a lot of opportunities for it to be moving or bring out empathy. But given the sort of weirdness and almost seeming randomness of some of the forest elements, how did you feel about the story?
I thought it was very sweet, honestly. I think it was very relatable. Obviously, us being childhood best friends, it was kind of nice to have that setting of like, oh, I'm looking back on this childhood friendship and what happened. And kind of interestingly, because the way they framed the story from the get-go, where they explained it as like, oh, well, this is when, quote unquote, it happened. You have this kind of underlying sense of dread the entire time because you're like, oh gosh, they're not mentioning them in the present tense as if one of the characters dies. I kind of like that it's like innocent enough for a lot of it. And then we get these kind of ramping up of the horror elements. And in between, we get these scenes where we're interacting with other characters. We need to make decisions for them based on like limited information and getting to learn a little bit more about our characters and their relationship to each other, their relationships with their families. I honestly thought it was very engaging. I will say, because our views are different, I know there was a couple points towards the end that we were a little confused as to what characters were related to others. That was like the only small bit, but also that was us cutting up the gameplay a little bit. So I won't blame the game for that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of just elements of the pixel art style where it was a little hard to distinguish between like, oh, this little boy isn't one of us. Every time we had to go do a cutscene, you have to like go through a bush, but the bush is the same color as the background bushes. And you're just like confused that we're gonna walk off a cliff every time. Like there was just like there was a little bit of design decisions there that made some distinguishing with the eyes a little bit hard, but I don't think it really took away from the game. It was just like one or two confusing moments.
Sort of along those lines, I was kind of looking at the reviews because I was like, I'm wondering just what people are saying about this game. What I saw very often is people complaining about bugs in the game. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think we only came across maybe one or two of them where you kind of clipped through a certain area. Maybe they made enough patches where we didn't get many bugs, unless you're remembering any.
No, I don't remember there being any bugs. There were instances where you didn't have a wall and I did. And so I clipped through a wall, but then it just killed me when it did that. We just start over. So I don't know if that's a bug as so much just like, well, if you put me through a wall when you don't have one, then I'm dead.
Right.
So I didn't think we encountered that. And I mean, this game is only a year old and it is, I imagine, like potentially one person working on it. The developer's name is Tokuro Niyori. That could be a game development studio. I'm not sure. It's obviously in Japanese. And Brie, you were saying you're like, I don't know how to say the name.
Yes, I purposely skipped that.
It's in hiragana. It's not even an English character. So don't have a good sense of whether or not this game is a studio or just an independent person. So honestly, like either way, it's definitely, we're not talking about some giant studio here that's like having a ton of play testing, right? I can be a little bit sympathetic. Definitely a year later, did not encounter any bugs.
The price of this game is $5.49, and we again got about 7 hours worth of gameplay from this. Honestly, the level of detail in this, the story and the puzzles, and just this unique of an experience, I don't think I've ever played a co-op game like this. Granted, I don't play a ton of co-op games, but the ones I do, I feel like they have like a very standard format. I have never seen anything like this, and I think it is so interesting to have this as a platformer, as a puzzle platformer, and for it to rely so heavily on communication. There were certain places where I wasn't able to do anything. You had to do everything for me and vice versa. There was parts where my vision was obscured or yours was. I thought this was so cool. I've never played anything like this. So $5.49 seems like such a steal to me. I don't know if I would maybe play this game again. I'd probably have to wait a while and then maybe play this with a different person maybe to see like if it would be the same sort of challenge, if I would remember the puzzles. Feels like a good price point to me.
If you play again, you'll have to make sure that you get the other view.
Oh, good point. Yeah, absolutely.
I do agree that this is one of the more unique platformers. As much as the mechanics of the platformers in general, overall as the genre, like a lot of it's been thought of and done, and nothing wrong with that, of course. But I think having that co-op, you don't see the same thing, you don't have the exact same mechanics element, is just such a great opportunity for this to feel so much different than other platformers.
There was a lot of different mechanics for us to learn and try, and I feel like again that the game really organically teaches you the new mechanics and then ramps up the mechanics so that you still have a challenge as you go throughout it. I feel like this game is paced well, the story is interesting. I know I mentioned the no mic sections. That's one of the parts that I loved the most about this game. Just a very small example without any spoilers. There was a section where we met a husband and wife in the woods, and I talked to the wife, Alice talked to the husband. Because we couldn't talk to each other, once they came back together, we had to choose who we agreed with, the wife or the husband. And talking afterwards with Alice, I realized that I got a completely different story from the wife than what the husband gave. It was very interesting because it was different context, and we made a decision based on that. And this was such a unique experience that like it's definitely going to stick with me. I'll probably pick it up maybe again like 6 months down the line, a year down the line. But if you can kind of handle the horror elements, because I do want to mention again that those are there and it does deal with some heavier topics, definitely worth the price of admission. I was so impressed with it.
If you're looking for an excuse to play with someone, one of your friends who maybe you don't see as often, and want to play a video game with them that's fairly accessible, I mean, this is a really great, easy choice. And you can really pick it up and put it down because it saves after every puzzle and sometimes midway through puzzles, depending on how long the puzzle is. So it's pretty great for that. I also love that the horror element lets them be even more creative with some of the puzzle platform elements because you don't have to have some sort of perfectly explained world. There was one point where I had to make clones of myself, and as long as one version of my clone was alive, then we would be able to progress. So there were points where I had to kill my other clones and use their dead bodies. And I would say like having this sort of horror element to it, for me, made it feel so much more unique to other platformers that I've played.
Every puzzle is unique, and this was a welcome surprise for me. And we did complete the game, which I'm very proud of us. Again,
yes.
It took about 7 hours, but well worth the time. This is a great foray into co-op games for us, so we'll definitely be playing more. This is very fun.
Yes, we will try to do more co-op. We usually do play single-player games, so we will probably have more single-player games on this podcast compared to multiplayer games. But I do think now that we have this podcast, it's an opportunity for us to try to play more multiplayer.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you so much for playing this with me. And do you know what we're playing next time?
Ooh, do I know what we're playing next time? We're going to be playing Horticular. It is a gardening game. And Brie, I kind of gave you a preview of this, but there is a game that Brie and I used to play growing up. It's called Sim Park. And this is the closest thing I have seen to Sim Park since Sim Park. So I'm excited for you to play it.
I'm very excited for that.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.